Today at 5:30, UK net migration figures hit a record high. The number of people arriving compared with those leaving the UK has doubled to more than 500,000 in 1 year.
The Prime Minister and the Labour leader have both suggested recently that immigration should fall, and yet the reality is the complete opposite. So what happens now?
Also on the programme, a day of strikes, teachers walk out in Scotland for the first time in 40 years. University lecturers walk out across the UK over pay and conditions. The little boy murdered by his own family. A review says information about child protection must be better shared. NHS England bosses warn that people are dying because of long delays for ambulance crews handing patients over at A&E. And more than 1,000 Paddington bears left for the Queen after she died are delivered by Camilla, the Queen Consort, to a children's nursery.
And on BBC London tonight, the row over low traffic neighbourhoods. Latest research suggests they cut pollution and traffic, but not everyone agrees with the initial results.
Good evening. The UK's net migration figure has hit a record high. 500,000 more people entered the UK than left between June last year and this year, according to the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics. It's more than double the number from the year before. The rise is driven by people arriving legally from outside the EU, foreign students, and by more people travelling after the pandemic. Our home editor, Mark Easton's been looking at the figures. He's here.
Sophie, the figure of 504,000 more people arriving than leaving the UK in the year to June is the highest ever recorded by some margin, actually. If we look back over the past 30 years, net migration, it was actually minus 13,000 in 1992, rising to 330,000 just before the Brexit referendum, 310,000 before the pandemic. Then you had that big fall amid the COVID restrictions, and now this record number. So let's break it down into people from the EU, British nationals, and people from the rest of the world. Well, 51,000 more EU nationals left than arrived. We gained 45,000 British nationals, but the net addition of citizens from the rest of the world, just look at that, in 12 months, 509,000.
Yes, they are all master's students.
So what's going on? Well, a substantial proportion of arrivals are students. 277,000 came in the year to June. People like Navin from India and Luana from Brazil, currently studying at York University.
The UK offers lots of opportunity for international students like us to study here and access this amazing and high-quality educational system.
I have to pay 22k a year, and even upwards, it increases every year by 5%.
£22,000 a year.
So that all goes to the university, so it helps fund the university.
The Prime Minister was today said to be concerned about foreign students arriving with family members to take low-quality qualifications, something the head of York University argues misses the point.
They bring vitality to British businesses, and some of them create their own companies. Now, this is, if we're looking for a growth story at the moment, this is a growth story. This is something to the value of £26 billion to the UK economy each year.
Another large group of arrivals in the last year have been Ukrainians fleeing the war in their homeland. Around 200,000 are known to have come recently, many taking advantage of special visas. A smaller number of people from Hong Kong and from Afghanistan have also been given bespoke visas to live in Britain. Whatever the reasons, the headline figure will intensify argument about what Britain's immigration policy should look like post-Brexit.
The key takeaway is don't assume that these figures are some kind of new normal that we're going to have, over the next 10 years. This is a relatively unusual period that we're currently seeing.
Today's migration figures do not include those arriving in small boats or coming to the UK by other irregular routes, but there are statistics highlighting the current challenges of the asylum system.
Well, over the last 20 years, asylum claims have gone up and down depending on various international crises. The latest annual figure is 72,000, and that is close to the previous record back in 2002. Meanwhile, the backlog in the asylum system is at a record level, with 143,000 people awaiting an initial decision, while the number returned to their country of origin in the most recent year is under 23,000, far below the pre-Brexit referendum annual average of 64,000.
Speaking on BBC Politics Live today, the former Conservative Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, accepted more needed to be done.
We have to continue to work really hard on driving these numbers down and understanding, as I said, what the factors for
they're going up. They're not
the
going
driver
down.
and tackling at source and making sure that our processes are working as good and efficiently as they should be.
Have they been up until now?
I would say that there is room for improvement.
The government, elected on a promise to reduce migration, is said to be fully committed to bringing down overall numbers. But Downing Street today declined to put a timescale on that ambition, amid calls for more foreign workers to be allowed to come in to fill gaps in the labour market and boost economic growth. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Our political editor Chris Mason joins us now from Westminster. So you've got some political leaders saying these migration numbers, they need to fall. The complete opposite is happening. What happens now?
So yeah, we've had it in recent days, haven't we? The Prime Minister suggesting that immigration should fall. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, talking about what he described as immigration dependency and the UK needing to wean itself off that. Now, we should say not all political leaders advocate or would like to see falling immigration. Take the Scottish National Party, they would like to see immigration go up. But when we look at these figures, outwardly, it's flattering, isn't it, to our country, because lots of people see the UK as a magnet. They are drawn towards us. And yet, the whole question of the numbers creates political and societal quandaries. So, for those political leaders that talk of getting the numbers down, actually delivering lower numbers would be politically difficult. Do you reduce the number of international students? Do you reduce the number of people coming into work for the NHS? And at what consequence? Where does it leave those growth targets, those desires to get the economy growing? And yet, if the numbers remain high, there is societal pressure on school places, on housing, and again on the health service. So it is incredibly difficult, not least for the politicians at the moment, who are saying one thing when the observable reality is the opposite.
Chris Mason, thank you. Tens of thousands of workers have been on strike across the UK today in a series of walkouts affecting schools, universities and Royal Mail sorting offices. The strikes are over pay and working conditions. In Scotland, the first national strike by teachers in 40 years meant millions of children were off school. Across the UK, postal workers also began a 48-hour strike. There have been more talks ahead of rail strikes in the run-up to Christmas. And tomorrow we find out the dates in December when nurses will go on strike. And up to 70,000 lecturers and staff have also walked out today at 150 universities across the UK over pay, short-term contracts and at some places over pensions. Our education editor Bronwyn Jeffries reports.
On picket lines at almost every university in the UK, from Cardiff to Belfast, lecturers on strike, wanting better pay, more secure jobs, whether in Glasgow or Manchester, where Morgan, teaching while he studies for a PhD, spoke to me.
I'm not prepared to struggle for years and years on end. The students deserve staff who are feeling secure, who are feeling confident in their work, who can get to know the students over a long period of time and teach them properly. I don't feel like I can give that if I'm on a contract that's 3 or 6 months.
What do we want? Equal pay! When do we want it? Now!
At his level, pay is up to £16,000.
The strength of feeling on picket lines is about issues that have been brewing in universities for many years, about work that feels increasingly insecure and casual, and university staff who are seeing their pay being left behind by inflation.
Students have already had their education disrupted by COVID. Now, more strikes in this long-running dispute.
I think if it was nearer the end of the year or even at the beginning in January, it'd be a lot worse for students.
I understand why they're doing it. It would be nice if we could get reimbursed for some ways.
Third-year Georgia is sympathetic, but told me students have had a raw deal.
As a paying customer, I feel like I'm not supported enough by the university. And sometimes in times like this, I really feel alone because, as I said, there are so many disruptions.
So when I sat down with the union leader, I asked why should students put up with more disruption?
They shouldn't have to put up with this, but staff shouldn't have to put up with 25% pay cuts.
What are you asking for now?
So we are asking for a lot more than the 3% they've offered in a cost of living crisis that doesn't touch the sides. If employers meaningfully addressed casualisation and employed people properly and prevented people working at burnout levels, you know, we could talk about pay.
The union argues there is a deal to be done. Universities say money is tight. In England, fees are still just over £9,000.
That was set 10, 11 years ago and hasn't moved. So we really don't have the headroom to continue to support pay awards that are way, way, way above what we can afford.
While negotiations will chew over these issues, universities say they'll try to limit the impact on students of strikes. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News, Manchester.
Meanwhile, every school in Scotland was shut today, with the exception of a handful in Orkney and Shetland, as teachers went on strike for the first time in 40 years. The Scottish Government says the 10% pay rise being demanded is unaffordable. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon reports.
Just show me what you're doing then.
So I set out A.
Okay.
It's back to home learning today for John and his sons Owen and Finn.
But are those two groups the same? Is it different?
Like hundreds of thousands of other children right across Scotland, the strike means their schools have shut for the day.
Any other day I would like school, but it's my birthday, so I don't really mind.
John is juggling working from home with childcare. For Owen, who has autism, the change of routine isn't easy.
I'm stressed about it because I want to make sure that the boys are okay, and the biggest challenge is balancing my work with looking after my children, trying to keep them occupied, trying to do their work. You know, I think that it's a sad reflection that the teachers have had to resort to this course of action.
Tens of thousands of teachers are taking part in the walkout, reluctant to strike, but insisting their salaries must track inflation.
You're starting to notice the fact that after you've paid all of your bills, after everything's come out of your salary, what you've got left with is minimal.
Difficult decision. We don't want to see children not in school. We want them learning every day. However, I think they were holding a gun to our head, to be honest.
That's strong language.
Yeah, it's strong language, but it was a poor offer they gave us.
Teachers in Scotland had previously been offered a 5% increase. 2 days ago, the offer to those on the lowest salaries was upped to 6.85%. Unions said this was an insulting offer, well below the 10% they wanted.
There has to be a reality check amongst the trade union colleagues about where that money would have to come from and the impact on that. We cannot achieve everything that we want if we're to succeed with a 10% pay increase for teachers on all grades. That's simply not affordable.
This one-day walkout is the first national strike in Scotland's schools since the 1980s. Teachers telling us they are angry and disappointed at what's on offer and the way they've been treated, and feel they had no choice but to go on strike.
We want 10%!
More talks will take place next week. All sides hoping further disruption to children's education can be avoided. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Glasgow.
A report into the death of a 5-year-old boy who was killed by his family has called for the Welsh Government to change how agencies share information about child protection. Logan Mwangi was murdered by his mother, stepfather and a teenager at his home near Bridgend in July last year. Hospital doctors didn't pass on a list of significant injuries the little boy had suffered. Our correspondent Thomas Morgan has the story, and a warning: his report contains distressing details.
If he's unconscious, he needs me.
A mother in distress.
He needs Mum.
Her young boy missing. But it transpired this was all a lie. Angharad Williamson, stepfather John Cole and 15-year-old Craig Mulligan had beaten and brutally killed 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. Back in August 2020, Logan was taken to A&E with several significant injuries. In March the following year, he was put on the Child Protection Register before being taken off 3 months later. On the 31st of July, his body was found dumped by John Cole in a river behind the home. Today, a child practice review found that the paediatric consultant that saw Logan 11 months before he died failed to make a child protection referral when assessing him.
This was a significant missed opportunity for Logan. Had further information from health been shared, it most likely, though we cannot say for sure because of hindsight bias, would have triggered a child protection assessment.
Today's report highlights how COVID restrictions prevented social workers, healthcare workers and the police from gaining a true picture of how Logan lived his life behind closed doors. But the main criticism revolves around the absence of information sharing between those agencies involved and a call for a national review into this area.
In hindsight,
The Welsh Government say a programme to transform children's services is already in place and would not conduct another review at this time.
It's one that we have heard many times before, and for me, we need to go further, and I would like Welsh Government to undertake an urgent review of the accountability structures which underpin child protection.
Logan was described as a happy, intelligent young boy. His death will be remembered by so many, and the lessons from it will have to be learned. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Bridgend.
The time is just after 5:45. Our top story this evening. The UK's net migration figure hits a record high of more than 500,000 people in a year. And coming up, police are texting 70,000 people who have been targeted by scammers. Some have lost large sums of money.
And on BBC London, the police commissioner says 100 officers can't be trusted to speak to the public, but he's not allowed to sack them. And on the eve of Black Friday, we look at how to spot the real bargains.
To the World Cup now, and both the England and Wales camps have been putting in their last training sessions before tomorrow's second group matches against the USA and Iran. Natalie Perks is in Doha for us. Natalie.
Yeah, big day tomorrow. England know a win over the US would put them into the last 16. And for Wales, a win against Iran would do wonders for their chance of doing the same. In a minute, we'll have the latest from the Wales camp with Howell Griffith. In the last few minutes, I must tell you that FIFA has confirmed Welsh fans will be able to take rainbow bucket hats and rainbow flags into the stadium. That's after some of them had them confiscated in their first match. But first, we're going to hear from England. They had that big win, of course, that 6-2 win. But they've never beaten the US at a World Cup before.
Please welcome the turkey!
Thanksgiving in the desert, not exactly a common sight in Qatar. As Americans in Doha were dreaming of a win tomorrow, the US team captain was promising they won't make a meal of it.
England are currently one of the favorites to win the World Cup. I think that in a lot of games, people would probably say that we're the underdogs, but we carry that with pride.
History is on their side.
The game between the United States and England ends in a sensation.
In 1950, a team of part-timers beat England 1-0 in one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history.
This is Dempsey. Decent try, Green spilled it!
And in 2010, this speculative shot was helped on its way for a 1-1 draw.
Oh dear, oh dear!
The game against America, you just can't take it lightly. There's an element of chaos to the American side and the way that they play, and that's what they thrive on. And so it actually reinforces that you've got to be really clued in.
That's something these young Lions showed in spades against Iran, beating Asia's highest-ranked
country on the map, really. They're regaining our respectability on a world stage, and we've got to keep doing that.
In the souks, in the squares, fans are ready.
Come on, England!
No one wants their World Cup voyage to meet an early end. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Doha.
Between the sombreros and headdresses, bucket hats have found their place in Qatar's international culture clash as Welsh fans prepare for their second taste of World Cup football.
We've had a great time, to be honest. Better than what we've anticipated, because we were apprehensive coming.
If we don't beat Iran, I don't think we deserve to go through.
After all the euphoria of simply getting to a World Cup, Wales have had to deal with the reality of being on a global stage and the pressure that brings on and off the pitch.
The threat of a yellow card stopped Gareth Bale from wearing the One Love armband on Monday. A rainbow flag at Wales's training ground had by today disappeared. FIFA's decisions frustrating.
We weren't too happy about not being able to wear it, obviously with the sanctions that could have been put in place, which ultimately I know people said, oh, he should have worn it, but I would have been sent off after about 25 minutes. So, of course we support it, but we're here to play football at the same time.
By today, words were chosen very carefully.
I don't want to talk about political issues, but I can give you a very short sentence in response to your question. No, we are not under any pressure. The fact is that we have come here to play football.
Both teams are wanting to focus on the game, but knowing the politics are still under the spotlight. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Doha.
Almost 23,000 people who were taken to hospital by ambulance in England last week had to wait more than half an hour outside the hospital before they could be handed over to staff in A&E. NHS managers have warned that ambulance crews are having to deal with long delays, and they say the situation is leading to deaths. Last week, nearly a third of ambulance journeys to hospitals with patients resulted in waits of 30 minutes or more. It should be no more than 15. Hospitals were close to full, with 95% of beds occupied. More than 13,000 patients were in hospital beds, even though they were ready to leave. That's partly down to delays with social care. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports from Milton Keynes.
These are some of the NHS's jugglers, every day trying to free up beds for those who've just arrived and get others safely home. It can be an uphill struggle. They have to keep the system moving. Nigel is a senior paramedic at the front door of the hospital as ambulance crews wait to hand over patients.
At the moment in A&E we're very full. There's nowhere to move the patients, so the crews at the moment are what we're doing cohorting. So we have one crew at the moment that's going to take 3 patients. If another crew comes in, they'll take that patient as well. That will release 3 crews.
Nigel has been transferred to work in the hospital. Each day he liaises with doctors and nurses to find spaces in A&E, move patients out of the corridor and get ambulance crews back on the road.
We've got 85 in the department, we've had 19 in the last hour and 108 so far today.
It's a complex numbers game. At the midday meeting, Julie reviews with colleagues what the latest A&E pressures mean for the rest of the hospital.
Over in surgery we have 1 male bed available with 3 definites and 8 potentials.
It's at the second highest alert level. There are 74 patients in beds who are fit to leave.
Opal 3 means for us that there's a significant blockage in getting people out of the hospital. We're very full at the moment. We have a significant number of patients that no longer need to be in hospital for their care.
One solution is a new same-day emergency care centre, aiming to treat people quickly so they don't need a bed. Victoria, who's a consultant here, says getting older patients back home if possible is vital.
If we can prevent 30% of people coming into hospital at the front door, that's 30% fewer people that need to come into hospital in the beds. As soon as you come into hospital, you start to decondition. So a frail or older person will start to lose muscle tone and strength and independence, even on day 1. So if we can prevent that, even for 1 to 2 days, that would be significantly important.
The centre's also helpful for patients like Sheila, who can get a check-up after an operation.
I've got no complaints whatsoever. No, I come in, they done it, and I was home.
So how does the hospital boss see the bigger picture? He says it's all about getting patients the right support at home.
If I had a blank cheque for the NHS, I would spend it not in the hospital, but in community and social care to free up capacity in our hospital to treat more patients.
I've just taken him round to X-ray.
Ministers say more money will go to social care. NHS England says there are more call handlers and hospital beds. But as today's figures show, the pressures on those on the front line are as intense as ever. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Milton Keynes.
Police are sending text messages to 70,000 people today and tomorrow, asking them to get in touch because they have been targeted in a phone scam by criminals trying to trick them out of thousands of pounds. More than 100 people have now been arrested by the Metropolitan Police in what is the UK's biggest anti-fraud operation. Some victims have been tricked out of large sums of money. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons explains.
It's the Met's biggest ever operation against fraudsters.
The new strategy, taking away their tools.
Hello?
Specifically a website allegedly run from this flat in East London, which police say was used by nearly 60,000 criminals worldwide. iSpoof has been closed by the FBI. It was advertised openly online,
The #1 spoofing service.
with handy how-to guides. Police say it was used to call victims anonymously while pretending to be from their bank.
We're all used to these one-time passwords that come to your phone, for example, and you need to somehow con somebody to give you that over the phone. That's the core of this. And to do that, you need to impersonate perhaps being their bank. To impersonate their bank, you need specialist software that allows your ordinary phone to pretend to be a bank phone.
It's called spoofing. Police obtained phone recordings intercepted from a server in Norway. They believe iSpoof allowed criminals to make up to 20 calls a minute to people around the world. £48 million was stolen. One person lost £3 million. The Met plans to send 70,000 text messages to victims for whom it has numbers but no names. That's been criticised. The obvious concern is that scammers will pose as the police and send their own text messages. So the Met's messages will only go out today and tomorrow. They won't contain any links, and they'll direct people to the Met's own website and then to Action Fraud, where they can fill in their details. A 34-year-old man has been charged with fraud and organised crime offences. But the investigations continue into those allegedly using the service. There have been 120 arrests. The message to the scammers is, we know who you are. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Paddington bears have been delivered to a Barnardo's nursery in East London by the Queen Consort Camilla. More than 1,000 bears were left by members of the public for the Queen after she died. Now gathered up and cleaned up, some have been taken for a children's teddy bears picnic. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell reports.
Their stay in Clarence House had come to an end. This morning, after a sightseeing tour of central London, it was time for these Paddington bears to meet their new owners.
Anybody want a bear?
Hand delivering them at this Barnardo's nursery in East London was the Queen Consort, who's also the charity's patron.
Tea? Oh, yes, please.
It was this film, to mark Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee, that touched a nation and connected the monarch to the little bear from Peru. When the Queen died, hundreds and hundreds of bears and soft toys were left as tributes. And having been carefully collected and cleaned, they're now ready to find their forever homes.
What a mess! Even I've never made a mess like this before.
And who better to read the story Paddington Takes a Bath than the bear's on-screen adoptive father, Mr. Brown.
This label says it all. This special teddy bear was left at a royal park or residence in memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022. And on the reverse, it says, please look after this bear, and it's signed by Her Majesty the Queen Consort. And I think, you know, all the children here who've received one of these bears today may not quite get the impact of it now, but to have that by your bed in years to come will be quite special.
After the marmalade sandwiches, it was time for the Queen Consort to go. But over the next few weeks, 1,000 Paddingtons and Teddies, which were left in royal parks and palaces, will be given to children across the UK. Sarah Campbell, BBC News, East London.
Let's have a look at the weather now with Helen Willits. Hello.
Hello. I dug my duffel coat out this week, Sophie. It's been so wet as well, hasn't it? Lots of welly boots needed, but it's been quite awful driving in it, hasn't it? With all the spray and the standing water, the local flooding on the fast routes, and we've had yet more rain today. So adding to the totals, which have already made it a record-breakingly wet month in Scotland and in southern parts of England, with many places having at least a month's worth of rain, if not more. As I say, today's rain just adding to those amounts. This is the line of heavy rain with its squally winds. That's gusts of wind getting up for a minute or more, 60, 70 mile an hour in the west, and it'll remain pretty windy in the west throughout the rest of this evening and overnight. Although that rain is now clearing away from eastern areas, the showers do tend to diminish a little bit overnight. The winds do later ease down. It should be largely frost-free because we keep quite a brisk wind going through the night. And then tomorrow, just a window though, of slightly drier weather. Not for all. There'll still be lots more showers coming into the north and the west. They'll be heavy with hail, thunder and, as today, sleet and snow over the tops of the mountains. Just fewer further south and east, so some places may escape altogether. And temperatures will still be around about the average for time of year, 9 to 14 degrees Celsius. But we are going to get some milder weather coming in for the weekend. So there's that ridge of high pressure bringing us that brief window of dry weather tomorrow, but not for long. The weather fronts rush in again. November's still not finished with its rain across our shores. So Saturday brings the rain and the strengthening southerly winds into many central and western areas. Gales accompanying it. Might not get to the south and east until after dark, but once it does get to the south and east, it may then linger into the second half of the weekend. Either way, for most of us, it looks as if we're going to see another dollop of unwanted rainfall as we go through the weekend. Sophie.
Helen, thank you. And that's it from us. If you're just joining us for the news at 6, apologies. We have been on early tonight because of World Cup matches on BBC One later. But tomorrow we will be back again as normal at 6. It's time now to join our news teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.